Hey folks, Eric Stackelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. Always great to be with you live, usually on Wednesdays, sometimes on Thursdays, where we can go in depth here for the next hour. It's going to be good. It's 4 p.m. Eastern time where I am. We're going until 5 p.m. Eastern time. We've already got a very active chat. I love it. You know, before, and I'm watching before the live stream even starts at the top of the hour at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'm already watching the chat. It's been going on for a while, even before the live stream starts, and it will last for a while after we wrap up, which is really cool to see all the watchmen and women on the wall kind of networking with each other. They're making friendships here, no matter where they are around the world. So it's really fun for me to see that, and a blessing to have you all here with us on a beautiful mid-June day, June 15th. Can you believe it? Here in the States, the 4th of July is right around the corner, so we're gearing up. It's going to be an interesting summer, I would say, in the United States, to say the least. We could talk about that maybe a bit more in the Q&A. Certainly in the Middle East, we are off to the start of another long, hot summer. And this summer may be hotter than usual if recent events are any indication. We want to get into it in a minute. Before I do, I just want to say hello to everyone. We have people from all over the world, once again, all over the U.S., of course, but all parts of the world. We have someone saying shalom from Milan, Italy. My wife is half Italian. Everyone thinks I'm Italian, but believe it or not, I am not Italian. German, Irish, and English, but married to a feisty Italian, half Irish woman. Let's see. So shalom from Milan. We had Canada. We have Tennessee, Manchester in the UK. We'll have Africa, I'm sure. We always have a great African contingent with us. Asia, Latin America, Europe, of course, the UK, also a big contingent. Great to have everyone. And without further ado, let's get into it because we have a lot to get into. Hey, by the way, before I get into it, I assume if you're with us here in the live stream that you are, I refer to our live stream audience as the sons and daughters of Issachar. The Bible talks about that elite group of 200 men who surrounded King David. They knew the signs, they knew the times, and they knew what Israel should do about it. Well, I believe that our live stream audience, and we'll have thousands with us today before all is said and done, that these are the modern day sons and daughters of Issachar. I truly believe that. You understand the signs, you understand the times, and that's why you're here. We're building this Watchman community. It's a lot of fun, but we've got some breaking news to lead off with. Now, I want to let you know what we're going to get into today. Number one, we're going to talk about this major, can I say the word historic, natural gas deal between Israel, Egypt, and Europe, the European Union in specific. Now, I'm going to throw a question out there to you all now because, of course, we're going to wrap up today with our Q&A like we always do. So stick around until the end. Excuse me. Again, we're going till 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we will spend the last 15 minutes or so at least on questions. I'm throwing this out to you all. This gas deal, maybe you didn't hear about it yet. That's why you come here to the Watchman. I'm going to fill you in today, but do you believe there are prophetic implications? You know, the book of Ezekiel talks about that hook in the jaw, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. Why does this latter days confederation, led, I believe, by Russia, come against Israel? They ultimately meet their demise on the mountains of Israel. But why? Why did they come? What's the trigger for them to come against Israel in, quote, as the prophet Ezekiel says, the latter days? That's latter with 2 T's, not 2 D's. I believe the reason, the hook in the jaw the Bible talks about, could very well be Israel's growing, almost, can we say, massive supply of natural gas that they're discovering continually now off the coast, off the Mediterranean coast in northern Israel. So Russia obviously supplies some 40% of Europe's oil and natural gas until now, because Europe is trying to wean themselves off quickly, their dependency on Russian gas. I want to talk more about the particulars of this historic deal today. And by the way, Egypt is also a partner in this deal. We're going to talk about how this is all going to go down. How is Israel going to get this natural gas to Europe? Number one. Number two, how will Russia respond to this? They can't be happy, right? To see Israel fill the gap that Russia had filled for years. And third, the prophetic implications. And fourth, just a comment here, folks, isn't it interesting, after years of Europe and the European Union condemning Israel over everything from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria to the Golan Heights, condemning not only at the EU in Brussels, but at the UN, supporting resolution after resolution against Israel. Isn't it interesting how things have now come full circle and the tide has turned, and now Europe is turning to Israel for help to fill that natural gas need? And why is that? Because Europe foolishly allowed itself to become reliant on Russian natural gas. And Vladimir Putin now has the power to shut that natural gas off, to shut off the heat in the middle of the European winter. That's what short-sighted Europe, the EU, that's the situation they allow themselves to be put in. And now Israel is going to bail them out as best as Israel can. I don't know how quickly they're going to try right away to get this thing rolling and get the natural gas in there to Europe, but it might take a little while, you would think, to work out the kinks, I guess you would say, to get things up and running. We'll see. They are, according to the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she says that they want to get this going right away, and she called what Russia is doing to Europe blackmail, and I quote, and she's sick of it. She gave a speech at Ben Gurion University in Israel yesterday saying that, using the word blackmail, hey, I agree, number one, but number two, again, you allowed yourselves to be put in this situation to be blackmailed. Now, Ursula von der Leyen is German, and she was the defense minister for Germany for several years. Now she's got this position at the European Commission. But speaking of Germany, and my last name is Stackelbeck, a very German name, half German. Speaking of Germany, a few years ago, I believe it was 2018, former President Trump gave a speech at the UN. And we have that clip someplace. I should play it on the newscast because it is stunning, folks. You can probably look this up on the web and find it. Trump gave a speech and he said to Germany and said to Europe in particular, hey, you're making a big mistake to allow yourselves to become reliant on Vladimir Putin for your oil and natural gas needs. And there's footage of the German diplomats in the audience listening, laughing, literally laughing and scoffing at what Trump is saying. No one's laughing now in Germany. So very interesting times. We'll talk about that, this historic deal, number one. Number two, I want to talk about the potential Iranian rocket launch. Have you heard about this? Now, Iran several times has tried to launch a satellite into space over the past 3 years or so. They haven't had much luck, but they are determined to do it, folks. And why do they want to do that? Because if you successfully launch a satellite into orbit, it's going to help you in the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, which, by the way, you produce for one reason and one reason only. That is to mount them with a nuclear warhead. That's what ICBMs do. And another thing about it, those ICBMs are not for Israel. They're not even for the Sunni Arab nations in the Middle East. They're not even for Europe. Those ICBMs do exactly what their name says. Intercontinental ballistic missiles. They are designed to carry a nuclear warhead across continents, across oceans. I'll give you one big guess who those ICBMs are for. That's right. The nation where I am sitting right now, the nation that Iran, the Iranian regime, I should say, refers to as the Great Satan, the United States. That is the ultimate target of those Iranian ICBMs, if God forbid they ever are able to develop them. Clearly, though, they're trying, and this rocket launch that may be coming any day now is another indicator of that. So we'll talk about the gas deal. We have a whole hour here. We'll talk about the rocket launch potential and the ramifications of that. And we will talk about the drama surrounding this Israeli airstrike. Now, Israel has not claimed responsibility, but it's pretty clear that Israel was behind these airstrikes that shut down Damascus International Airport. Now, we talked about this on the newscast over the past few days, and I think it's a good place to start today, folks, because we have a breaking news update. Today, and I'm going to read right from the Times of Israel. This just came across the wire literally about an hour ago. I was doing prep work for the live stream. I thought I had it all laid out. And I said, whoa, okay, this is a big story that our audience will be very interested in. Listen to this. Russia summons Israel's ambassador to Russia for, quote, clarifications about that Damascus airport strike. Two things to keep in mind here. Number one, the Israel-Russia relationship has been rapidly unraveling. We have documented it here for you on the newscast repeatedly over the past few months. Secondly, the natural gas breakthrough today, Israel essentially replacing some of that Russian natural gas going to Europe. You know, Vladimir Putin and his regime are none too happy about that. But this is interesting, folks. And if you don't have the facts about the Damascus International Airport strike, very, very quick review to get you up to speed so you understand the importance of this Russian summoning, as the Times of Israel calls it. On Friday, early, last Friday, what was that, June 10th, last Friday, airstrikes at Damascus International Airport destroyed the runway there. No incoming and outgoing flights for the foreseeable future. Destroyed some other areas as well inside the airport, including a reception area where apparently visiting Iranian and Hezbollah dignitaries used to kind of hang out. So some heavy damage done to Damascus airport. It is inoperable right now. That's a big deal. And Israel did that for a simple reason, because Damascus International Airport has become a hub for advanced Iranian weapons shipments coming from Tehran, many times on civilian flights, landing in Damascus, and then the weapons are offloaded and transited over land into southern Lebanon, into the hands of Hezbollah. Now, these aren't intact missiles. They tried that early on, and Israel was onto their game and took them out. Now what Iran is trying to do is ship advanced weapons parts, in particular GPS systems, which would give your missiles precision. You would have a, drum roll please, you know the term if you watch the newscast on a regular basis, you would have a precision guided missile, PGM for short. So on civilian flights, very slick, the Iranian regime has been sending these GPS parts that would be used to equip precision guided missiles. Now, one of the men behind that is none other than the son-in-law of, we have to call him this, right, the not so dearly departed terror kingpin, Qasem Soleimani, former head of Iran's Quds Force, an arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Soleimani's dead and gone, of course, but his son-in-law lives on for now. And he has been involved, apparently, in these weapons shipments from Iran through Damascus to Hezbollah. So, long story short, Israel took decisive action and said, you know what? If you are going to try to use Damascus International Airport as basically a cover and a hub to transit weapons that will be used to kill Israelis at our doorstep, we're not going to let you do it anymore. We've warned you, Assad regime, the Syrian regime, which is hosting Iran and Hezbollah on its soil. We've warned you, don't let them do it. And they persist in doing it. And they're going to kill Israelis if we don't act. So we're going to act. And that's what Israel did. Well, Russia is not happy about this. Why? Why would Russia care? You say, well, Israel and Russia have a good relationship. Israel and Russia have this deconfliction mechanism. Their words, their term, both Russia and Israel have used that term, where Israel gives Russia fair warning, gives the Russians a heads up before Israel carries out airstrikes against Iranian and Hezbollah assets inside Syria. Remember, there are thousands of Russian troops in Syria right now at Israel's doorstep. More on the meaning of that in a few minutes and the prophetic meaning of that. So Israel has had this delicate relationship with the Russians in Syria, where they give Russia a heads up, and Russia has given Israel, I shouldn't say given, Israel can take it if it wants to, but Russia has granted Israel, hasn't stood in Israel's way, let's put it that way. In terms of the airspace over Syria, Israel has continued to operate freely, and do two things. Number one, take out these advanced Iranian weapons parts and shipments. And number two, push Iran and Hezbollah back from the Israel-Syria border, back from the Golan Heights. Russia has stood aside. Since September 2015 now, almost 7 years, Russia has been in Syria. They have stood aside, although not only has the rhetoric obviously ramped up against Israel from various Russian dignitaries, diplomats, more on that in a minute, major developments there, but also reportedly, and we did report this on the newscast last month, I should say, Russia reportedly, according to reports out of the Middle East, various media outlets in the region, Russia fired anti-aircraft missiles at Israeli fighter jets about a month ago when they were conducting strikes in Syria. No one has confirmed that in Russia or Israel, but those were the reports. Is it true? Perhaps. Is anyone watching right now, or would anyone watching right now be shocked? Look, folks, this is why you should care and why Israel should care deeply about the Russian presence in Syria. Number one, because Russia is a nuclear-armed superpower. Number two, because Russia does not share Israel's values, freedom, values of democracy. And number three, Russia is aligned with rogue regimes, whether it's China, Belarus, North Korea, which, by the way, Kim Jong-un just yesterday, the North Korean leader, came out strongly in favor of Russia. The communist regime in Beijing today came out in favor of Russia, pledging their support to Vladimir Putin once again. He's aligned with Venezuela, Belarus, rogue regimes, dictators, anti-Christian forces, wherever you turn. But Israel should be particularly concerned about the alliances that Vladimir Putin shares with Israel's greatest enemies. You can tell a lot about a man and a nation by the company they keep. I've said it before. I will continue to say it when it comes to Vladimir Putin. The Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad, arguably Israel's three greatest enemies. Throw into the mix Hamas. A delegation of Hamas leaders visited Moscow just last month and received a warm embrace from the Russian Foreign Ministry. So you do the math. Russia is a nuclear superpower aligned with Israel's greatest enemies with thousands of troops on Israel's doorstep. Call me crazy. But if I'm Israel, I'm feeling a bit uneasy about the situation right now. And now we have it. Let's get into the summoning, we'll call it today, of Israel's top diplomat in Russia, Alexander Ben-Zvi, Russia's deputy. I'm reading again from the Times of Israel. I'm glancing down at my phone. Sorry, not being rude, still looking at all of you, but want to read this just directly off my phone. I do not want to misquote it. Russia's deputy foreign minister has summoned Israel's ambassador to Russia, Alexander Ben-Zvi, to express Moscow's concern over a strike on Damascus International Airport last week that was widely attributed to Israel. Again, Israel never claimed responsibility for it. According to Russia's foreign ministry, Mikhail Bogdanov told Ben-Zvi that Moscow is not pleased with the justifications offered by Israel thus far and that it is waiting for additional clarifications, quote, within the framework of the existing Russian-Israeli mechanism to prevent dangerous incidents in Syria, aka Israeli and Russian fighter jets going at it in Syria accidentally. And that is, again, the deconfliction mechanism. Russia said, and this is rich, give me a minute. Russia said that the attack damaged the runway and airport buildings and disrupted the flow of humanitarian supplies to Syrian civilians. And Bogdanov, this foreign ministry spokesman, also stressed that Russia will not allow Syria to be turned into a theater of war between outside parties and insisted that Israel respect Syria's territorial integrity. Now, I'm not trying to be flip, and you saw me chuckle there, because, folks, in Israel, they would call it chutzpah. by the Russian regime. Brace yourself. They're talking about humanitarian supply. The Russians, the Russian regime of Vladimir Putin, which is knee-deep in an onslaught against Ukraine right now, a humanitarian disaster in Ukraine precipitated by the Russian invasion. Those same leaders, diplomats in Russia's regime are condemning Israel for disrupting the flow of humanitarian supplies by striking weapons at Damascus airport. You can't make this stuff up. Not only that, Russia's criticizing Israel. Israel should not be turned into a theater of war between outside parties. Meanwhile, Russia has called in thousands, reportedly, of mercenaries from Syria, Libya, and Chechnya, called them into Ukraine to fight alongside the Russian military. Sounds like outside parties to me. And lastly, Israel should respect, Russia demands that Israel respect Syria's territorial integrity. Is that what Russia did in Crimea in 2014? Is that what Russia is doing in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine right now? Again, you can't make this stuff up. The hypocrisy, the irony of it all, for Russia to issue this condemnation. Now, Israel had no response. I'm just scrolling down, reading some more here. Okay. Israel with no response. But folks, as I'm kind of, all I can do is kind of laugh because it's so outrageous, but let's get serious for a moment. This is a big deal because now Russia is saying to Israel, we're not going to allow, that's been going on for 7 years, like I said a few minutes ago, but now all of a sudden, Russia's not going to allow outside parties, presumably Israel and Iran and Hezbollah, go at it in Syria? Or does Russia mean we're not going to allow Israel to attack our friends, Iran, Hezbollah, the Assad regime, anymore in Syria? More likely that's what he means. And Israel needs to respect Syria's territorial integrity. And this follows a very harsh condemnation that was released over the weekend by Russia's foreign ministry. I talked about it on the Monday newscast. By the way, two things here. If you missed the first 23 minutes of this newscast live stream, you will see it afterwards. We will post it here on the channel. Secondly, if you've ever missed any newscast, you can find them right here in our archives. We've got different categories on the home page. And hey, if you haven't subscribed and you like what you're hearing for such a time as this, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We're going every day, Monday through Friday, sometimes on the weekends, depending on the news cycle. And I believe this summer I may have a lot of busy weekends, so stay tuned. Also, when you are on the homepage subscribing, you can click join and become a Watchman News Channel premium member. Don't worry. If you're not a premium member, you can still join us absolutely free every day. But if you love what you're seeing here and you're a faithful viewer of the Watchman Newscast, you might like to become a premium member. We've got many right here. I see one right now. Super Duper is the name, the handle. I'm looking at our live chat, and you will get the exclusive first look at every brand new episode of the Watchman Show. Pretty cool. Before anyone else in the world sees it, you, premium member, will see it every Thursday before it hits the air. We post it for our premium members with some exclusive behind-the-scenes commentary from yours truly. And we've got some good things planned, including some exclusive Q&As for premium members coming up. Stay tuned. Some announcements coming for our premium members. If you're not a premium member, don't be mad. Like I said, we still love you. But if you want to get go a little deeper with us and you like what you see here every day, check out the premium membership. It's a cool offer. Okay, that's out of the way. I made the pitch. I wanted you all to know. But right now, you have a situation where Israel has been able to operate freely in Syria, as we discussed. Is this an indication? And this follows that condemnation, which I started to run down for you over the weekend by Russia's foreign ministry, calling Israel's actions at the Damascus International Airport, quote, vicious, folks, and quote, provocative, and quote, a blatant violation of international law, according to Maria Zakharova of the Russian foreign ministry. It's pretty rich again, huh? A top spokeswoman for the Putin regime calling someone else vicious, calling Israel vicious and provocative actions. The hypocrisy of it just boggles the mind. But welcome to 2022. As the prophet Isaiah once said, we live in times where good is considered evil and evil is considered good. Folks, these are Bible times that you and I are living in right now. That's why I'm so glad you're with us here, joining us on the Watchman Newscast. Just taking a quick look here on our chat from around the world. Wow, we have people from every continent. I like to say there's a few penguins in Antarctica huddled around a laptop right now and around a phone watching as well. But we got people from all over the world. Amsterdam, Holland, I see right now. Greetings. That was a big deal. The statement over the weekend and then this summoning today of the Israeli ambassador. Folks, you're seeing the hints being dropped. Russia is losing patience. The deconfliction mechanism that we've seen the past 7 years may be running its course. And there were reports out of the Middle East yesterday that Iran, Hezbollah, and the Assad regime are starting to, I don't want to say pressure Russia, but they're starting to say to Russia, hey, when are you going to put your foot down and stop Israel from doing this? They're holding Russia accountable. You're supposed to be our friend. You're the big boy on the block. You're here in Syria, and you're allowing the hated Zionist entity to give us black eye after black eye and push us back and harm us left and right. Now they shut our airport down. When are you going to say something, Russia? When are you going to step up and defend us, your loyal allies? When you invaded Ukraine, the entire world abandoned you, but we, the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad, we stood by you, Moscow. Why aren't you standing by us, standing in the gap, and telling the Zionists to stop, threatening them? Their words, not mine, by the way. That's a hypothetical situation I just laid out, but I believe those are the kinds of conversations that are going on right now behind closed doors, folks, in Tehran and Damascus. Hey, right now, before Russia invaded Ukraine, and clearly, I mean, judging by 2015, where Qasem Soleimani, there's that name again, went to Moscow twice in the summer of 2015, met with Russian officials, met with Putin, and begged them to get involved in Syria. We need you to bail us out. We're on the ropes. Russia, Vladimir Putin said, certainly, we'd be glad to help. Why didn't you ask sooner? And why would he be so glad to get back into Syria? Because he wants to position Russia as a global superpower once again, folks. And this was his golden opportunity. Soleimani, the Iranian regime, opened the door, and Vlad walked right through. And guess what? Russia is in Syria to stay. We reported a few weeks ago that there were various accounts saying that Russian soldiers, or at least a chunk of Russian forces in Syria, might leave and head to Ukraine and turn over some of their bases in Syria to the Iranian regime. Not sure if that's going to happen. Haven't had any verification on that. But folks, either way, it's bad. Either Russian forces stay fully intact, or Russian forces, a sliver, they're never going to leave entirely until they're pushed out decisively, but they're going to turn over bases to Iran. Neither scenario is good. So we're keeping a very close eye on this, because this is just really coming to a disturbing crescendo. We've been documenting since last summer, really. That's when really the statement started coming out of Russia, where Russia reportedly was, quote, losing patience with Israel's operations in Syria. And there started to be some condemnations by various Russian diplomats. And the condemnations are becoming more intense, vicious, provocative. And now you have the Israeli ambassador being summoned. That's a big deal in the diplomatic realm when your ambassador is summoned, called on the carpet by the host country where he resides. And now we have that natural gas deal. If you thought Vladimir Putin was losing patience with Israel, and by the way, they're very upset with Israel and certain statements coming out of Israel's foreign ministry supporting Ukraine and condemning Russian behavior there. The natural gas thing, wow. Russia's not going to be happy, folks. Israel, tiny Israel, a nation the size of the state of New Jersey with under 9 million people living there in all, that's it. This tiny nation is going to step into the gap and replace mighty Mother Russia and its natural gas supply to Europe, and in the process, kind of break that blackmail thing that Russia had going on with Europe that we talked about earlier. Old Vlad is none too happy. Depends, of course, on how Vlad is feeling right now. There are various reports that he's had cancer treatments over the past few months. And when we talk, folks, about the war of Gog and Magog, that imminent war, will Vladimir Putin be the Russian leader who leads it? Will it be someone after him? I think that's an open question. He's almost 70 years old. He is, by most accounts, not in good health. Stay tuned. But on to the natural gas deal today. Let me give you some of the particulars. Again, this is breaking news just today, Wednesday, June 15th. Again, this was Israel. I'm pulling up a piece I'm going to quote directly from, again, from Times of Israel. They give me a good rundown. Israel, Egypt, and Europe. Okay, let's read. Israel is in a landmark deal signed in Cairo today. Israel agreed to export natural gas via Egypt to Europe. Israel will send the fuel to Egypt first, which will then liquefy the natural gas and then ship it off to Europe. And this will help, quote, the European bloc reduce Russian energy dependence. This deal means that Israel will export its natural gas to the European bloc for the first time. Folks, this is a big deal. This is prophetic, okay? This landmark agreement will, quote, increase liquefied natural gas sales to EU countries, which are, again, aiming to reduce dependence on supply from Russia in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. Last year, the EU imported roughly 40% of its gas from Russia, almost half. Madness. It has faced energy difficulties since imposing sweeping sanctions on Moscow. You think? The new agreement, will see Israel send the gas via Egypt. Egypt has the facilities now to liquefy this gas, then they'll send it on to Europe. According to Israel's energy minister, this is a tremendous moment in which little Israel is becoming a significant player in the global energy market. What have we said? They had a joint press conference today. Ursula von der Leyen was there, of the European Commission, and they signed this memorandum of understanding, and Europe will apparently help Israel and Egypt even more explore for more natural gas off both of their coasts. So Europe's going to be involved helping Israel with that technology. Could we say that Israel is now a natural gas superpower? Could we use that term, or is it too soon? I don't know. I think we could look. Europe came, they looked all around the world. Who did they come to for help when they needed it in their moment of need, when they had to wean themselves off that Russian natural gas? They turned to Israel, a light unto the nations. And I think of the book of Deuteronomy, where God Almighty tells Moses, I will make you the head of the nations and not the tail. We see tiny Israel. Folks, I really want you to think about this for a minute. The prophetic times we are living in, and why Israel, the reestablishment of the nation of Israel in 1948, was the ultimate prophetic signpost. Think about this. This tiny nation, again, the size of the state of New Jersey, under 9 million people, smack dab literally in the center of the world geographically. Look at the map. Israel is the center of the world, and Jerusalem, God's city, is the center of that center. No coincidences. This tiny nation, which has had to fight for its survival since being miraculously reestablished in 1948, is now a natural gas superpower, which is bailing out, essentially, mighty Europe and the European Union. God is doing something here. And we are in, I believe, the most prosperous times, no doubt, for the nation of Israel since Solomon's kingdom. What do you guys think? You want to comment on that? Do you want to talk about that in the Q&A? The Davidic dynasty, David and Solomon, it didn't last long. Those glory days for the Davidic dynasty with David and Solomon. And when Solomon at the end, sadly, kind of went astray. And after Solomon, the kingdom broke up into the Judah and Samaria, the Judean kingdom, the northern kingdom based in Samaria. So it didn't last long, those glory days when the Queen of Sheba came and all that good stuff. But you have to say right now, has Israel ever been more prosperous than it is right now? The hook in the jaw that Ezekiel talks about, that God lays out through the prophet Ezekiel in the book of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And this comes right after the dry bones prophecy in Ezekiel 37, where those dry bones, they got up and they walked. That's exactly what they did in 1948. Israel became a nation once again, flesh on those bones once again. But that is the prophetic signpost, 1948, no doubt. Why is this period in history different from every other period prophetically? Hey, for centuries, there's been wars and rumors of wars. Kingdoms have risen, they've fallen. We've seen dictators arise. We've seen mini antichrists, I guess you could see them, the likes of Hitler, others rise and fall and cause chaos, mayhem, and misery. And it's all happened again and again for thousands of years. But why is now, this period in history, different from any other time? Because Israel exists as a nation once again. Very simple. And that hook in the jaw could be this natural gas supply. Again, Israel is prosperous. Could it be envy? Could that be part of what Russia is doing when they drive south? They're already near the mountains of Israel. They're in Syria right now, as we've been discussing today. What will be the hook in the jaw? What will be the trigger? I've called it the great betrayal, because when I talk to current and former Israeli officials, they still say, hey, we've got this deconfliction mechanism and we've got it going and it's going to be okay. Russia's not going to turn against us in a major way. Yeah, they might be annoyed with us right now, but it's going to be okay. The Russians don't like Iran either. And we'll work it out. That's been the consensus among Israeli leaders, current and former, that I've talked to. But folks, you got to think right now that they're saying this is not going in a good direction. And Vladimir Putin is a very unpredictable individual. That's without a doubt. And again, he may not always be the Russian president. Who knows how his health is? Who knows if things continue to go sideways in Ukraine for the Russian military, if he lasts on the throne, so to speak, in Russia. By the way, it seems that Russia is starting to make some pretty significant gains in eastern Ukraine, despite the fierce resistance of the Ukrainian military. Russia is slowly and methodically making some pretty major gains in eastern Ukraine. Stay tuned there. But we shall see. We know that a day is coming. We don't know what the hook in the jaw will be, but the hook will be laying. It's very similar to what God did with Pharaoh, it seems, folks. When you read scripture, it seems like God himself brings this Russian leader down to the mountains of Israel, just like God himself brought Pharaoh out against the people of Israel, against the Israelites. And we are in the days. Let's just say that. Ezekiel talks about the latter days, and if we're not in them, we're awful close. We will continue to watch this, of course, very closely. Before we get to the Q&A, I have a quick minute. And what do you think today? Anything else you want to get into? Comment here. And again, leave your questions, and we'll pull them right up, and we will do our best to answer them. And we've got people from all over the world joining us. I love it. I love to look at our chat. It's very lively. It's very active. Thousands of people right now watching. And you're from, hey, only now, right? As bad as technology can be at times, with the nefarious things you see on the internet and people addicted to devices, man, with this technology, we can use it for good and communicate with each other and be watchmen and women on the wall and get the news out there. We couldn't have done this 10 years ago, right? We couldn't have done it. And now we can do it for such a time as this. Let's use this to our advantage as the body of Christ, okay, in these prophetic times. And we need to be a light in the darkness, because if we don't do it, folks, believe me, If we don't do it, the body of Christ, no one's going to do it. It's dark right now, and it's getting darker. We can shine a light in the darkness, bring the truth of the gospel, bring prophetic truths. You know, the prophet Daniel talks about the latter days and days when people will come along who will, quote, instruct many. Let's be the instructors. I guess you could use that word, right? In a former life, I was a teacher, and I guess I'm, in a sense, teaching a bit now in my current role that God's given me here with the Watchman platforms. Okay, that rocket program. How's that for a segue? Let's read it real quick, then we get into the Q&A, because I think this is important. I know you need to know about this. Okay, here we go. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Iran is preparing to conduct a test launch of a solid fuel satellite rocket. Why does that matter? Why should you care? Because the U.S., for one, has in the past expressed concerns that these Iranian satellite launches could help Iran develop ballistic missiles. And the Iranian Defense Ministry, straight from the horse's mouth, they are saying, yeah, we're going to do it. We are preparing to conduct a test launch of our Zalujina solid fuel satellite carrier rocket. And the launch is planned, and we've got 2 more planned as well. And it's a 3-stage rocket that uses both solid and liquid fuel engines. And the rocket is able to carry cargo weighing up to 200 kilograms and reach a height of 500 kilometers, according to Iran. I'm not very good at math, but this ain't good. I think that's the bottom line here that you should know about, because again, the satellite launch helps Iran get the know-how and develop the technology to eventually launch intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs for short. If you missed what we said about that, check out the full newscast afterwards. We'll be up here under newscast right here on the channel on the homepage. A lot of thoughts here, but let's boil it down to its barest essence and let's get into questions. The fact that Iran still has this very active and robust ballistic missile program can be laid at the feet of the West. What do I mean by that? In the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, Iran's ballistic missile program, and they're becoming a ballistic missile powerhouse, not to mention a drone powerhouse. That ballistic missile program was not even mentioned. It wasn't on the table in that 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Iran had a free hand to continue to develop ballistic missiles, including ICBMs. And you're surprised, West, US, Europe, that they're conducting satellite launches? You didn't demand that Russia's ballistic missiles be on the table. You didn't demand, Iran's ballistic missiles. You didn't demand that Iran's support for terror, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias, that be on the table. You didn't demand that Iran leave Syria. Nothing. You literally did nothing other than gift wrappers in sanctions relief. That's what the U.S. got out of it. Isn't that something? That's what the West got out of it. What did they get out of it? Nothing. The Iran deal. And if things continue to go the way they are going, they will get nothing in the current or the latest incarnation of that Iran deal, if it is indeed signed. So you can thank the original Iran nuclear deal for Iran potentially launching a satellite into orbit. There you have it. And that's the truth of the matter. Let's see if we have anything else to discuss before questions. In the list, the octopus strategy. I've called it the octopus approach that Israel is taking. Just to review, remember, this is very important. You're going to hear more about this in the days to come. Naftali Bennett, the current prime minister, and who knows, he may not be prime minister much longer because it looks like his coalition is unraveling. More on that to come. But I believe that no matter who the prime minister is, they will probably continue on with this strategy, the octopus strategy. Remember, Iran is the head of the octopus. I've always called Iran, the Iranian regime, the head of the snake. And they're using the term octopus because Iran has tentacles that stretch throughout the region. And that includes Gaza, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and beyond. Lebanon, of course. But now Israel is taking the fight directly to the head. Israel obviously has been hitting back in Syria, in Gaza, etc., against these Iranian proxies that surround it. But now Israel is taking it straight to the source. And we've seen a series of assassinations on Iranian soil of important Iranian regime figures. We talked about this on yesterday's newscast. So keep that in mind. I want to just hit on that before I start the questions. Remember, this is something I believe you'll hear more about. The octopus strategy, I guess is the word they're using. Very interesting, eh? Interesting times. Let's get into the questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. This is good. Okay, what do we have here? What do we have here? Let's see. Okay, pardon me as I take just 1 minute and look at your great questions. Good question from Lily Kim, not to be confused with Lil Kim. Question, can you tell us about the position Turkey is in? Turkey and Syria, Russia, Israel. Okay, she's saying basically, Kim is saying it's confusing. What position is Turkey in? They're kind of not getting along very much with Russia and Iran when it comes to Syria. And they've been not getting along with Israel for 10 years, but now all of a sudden they are. She says it's a bit confusing. What is the deal with Turkey? And I'm dovetailing to Kim's question. ADE King asks, would Russia even have the strength to launch an invasion of Israel? That's a good one. But she asked, dovetailing on Kim's question, should we not be more concerned about Turkey and their desire to revive the Ottoman Empire? Hey, I'm glad you guys are asking about Turkey, because a lot of times we get comments and they say, you're talking so much about Iran and Russia, Hamas, Hezbollah. You're forgetting about Turkey. No, I'm not forgetting about Turkey. It's just that Erdogan has been a bit quiet as of late because Turkey has been struggling economically in a major way. Inflation there is through the roof. So he's been trying to get back in the good graces of Israel and Egypt and the UAE, the Sunni Arab nations, and Saudi Arabia. Imagine that, because he needs them. Not only that, he wants a part of this natural gas deal. Erdogan, if he had his way, that pipeline would go from Israel through Turkey on its way to Europe. That is his dream. That's what he wants. Turkey's foreign minister was in Jerusalem a few weeks ago, and he laid it out. He said, we want to do business with you, Israel. We want to be in the natural gas business with you. And Turkey also has had some disputes with Greece, with Israel, with Cyprus over natural gas in the Mediterranean. Not to mention Lebanon and their coveting of that natural gas off the Mediterranean coast as well, to the point where Hezbollah has made some threats that if Israeli oil rigs set up shop and start pumping out that natural gas, that Hezbollah may attack the oil rig. Israel is on high alert for that. That's another story. The dispute, I guess you would say, the territorial maritime dispute between Israel and Lebanon. But back to Turkey. Erdogan needs economic help. He needs to be brought in from the cold. He completely isolated himself over the past decade plus with his behavior, with his rhetoric. Turkey has a hand in Syria, in Libya. They've had a hand in Azerbaijan, Armenia. Obviously, he has coveted Jerusalem, has Erdogan, and said that Jerusalem should be under the control of Islam. So he has been up to a lot over the past few years. You want provocative? Russia threw that word around earlier. Well, Erdogan is a very provocative individual who's on his best behavior right now. This is no friend of Israel. This is not a man that can be trusted. And it's tragic, and I've said this before, Turkey and Israel had a great relationship. Turkey and the United States, the West, had a great relationship for decades. Turkey was a secular or run by a secular government pre-Erdogan. He came to power, remember, 20 years ago, 2002. But pre-Erdogan, Turkey, look, secular, the military very strong in that country, a NATO member, the second largest army in NATO. That's nothing to sneeze at. Then Erdogan came to power and gradually, I don't know if you want to use the word purged. Yeah, I guess we could use the word purged. Purged out some of the powerful forces in Turkey who were not aligned with him, essentially who did not adhere to his Islamist agenda. And he's been working and chipping away at that for 20 years now. About 6 years ago now, we had the coup, the attempted coup against Erdogan. Some still ask, was it even a coup? Or was it orchestrated by Erdogan as a pretext to move against his enemies? We may never know. But to those two questions, he's playing a double game, clearly. He's on his best behavior right now because he wants a chunk of the natural gas and because he needs an economic lifeline. That's the easy story. That's one part of it. He'll turn as well against Israel. He may not be the guy. When the Gog-Magog invasion happens, perhaps Putin won't be the guy in Russia. Perhaps Erdogan won't be the man in Ankara. We don't know yet. But eventually, Turkey will be a part, I believe, along with Iran, which is explicitly named Persia. That's modern-day Iran in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So they'll turn eventually. And I'm sad to say, because the Turks are a great people. Istanbul, a beautiful city, a long heritage, long culture. But again, in all these nations, whether it's Russia, Iran, Turkey, it's the leaders. The leaders are a big, big problem. And Turkey is another example of that. Now, the other wrinkle here, you mentioned in the questions, the relations with Israel. I just explained that. It's a double game done in self-interest. But secondly, what about the relations with Russia and Syria? Kind of schizophrenic a little bit. Turkey agrees with Russia on some things, and they disagree strongly on other things, including in Syria, including in Libya, including in the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And right now, Erdogan is poised to invade northern Iraq and northern Syria once again. Remember, he is a devoted foe of the Kurds, and we love the Kurdish people here at the Watchman. I've spent time in Iraqi Kurdistan and just got a great impression of the Kurds. Pro-America, pro-Israel, moderate. What's there not to like? I mean, so that in the heart of the Muslim Middle East. So Erdogan is an avowed enemy of the Kurdish people as well. And he's about to make some moves, it looks like, once again, in Syria and Iraq. So the other players there aren't happy about that. And then the other part to this is, as we documented on the newscast yesterday, Iran, as vengeance for this series of assassinations on Iranian soil of Iranian officials, has been plotting to attack Israelis in Turkey. Now, a lot of Israeli tourists travel to Turkey. It's one of the most popular tourist destinations for Israelis, and Iran has been plotting to kill Israelis in Turkey. And Turkey's not very happy about that because they say, hey, wait a minute, that's embarrassing for us. We're trying to get cozy with Israel once again and be on our best behavior, and you're going to use our soil to assassinate Israelis? That's not good. But the Turkey-Iran relationship will weather that storm, no doubt, because Erdogan and the Turkish regime are no friends of Israel and the Jewish people. And honestly, besides the Iranian regime, the most fierce anti-Semitic, anti-Israel rhetoric has emanated from Recep Erdogan, the Turkish leader, over the past decade plus, without a doubt. So Turkey, to answer the question, double game. Ultimately, they have a lot more in common with Russia and Iran than they do with Israel and the West. And that's why I refer to Turkey under Erdogan's rule as NATO, NATO in name only. And that, yes, he does want to revive the Ottoman Empire. He sees himself as a modern-day caliph who would lead a new caliphate. We could talk a lot about Turkey. Okay, more to come. More to come. More questions. We've got a bunch today. This is good. Okay. Eric, this is from a question from By His Grace, Yeshua. Eric, do you believe the imminent response of Israel to Iran's nuclear facilities will trigger the Ezekiel war and possibly open the door for China to go to war with Taiwan at the same time? Great question, By His Grace. I don't know about the second half, if China would move against Taiwan while the Ezekiel war is unfolding, perhaps, because the whole world's going to be distracted by what's happening in the Middle East. But in a sense, the world's distracted by what's happening in Ukraine right now. China could have conceivably moved now, but I think what China is doing is kind of reading the tea leaves and taking the temperature in the room, so to speak, and seeing how the world is reacting to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How harsh are the sanctions? How is Russia weathering the storm economically? How isolated is Russia? So China, the communist regime in Beijing, very wisely, is stepping back and observing and taking notes for the day where they will move against Taiwan. Would it happen concurrently with the Ezekiel war? Always a possibility, tough to say. But to your other question, an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear facilities? Yes, I do believe that could precipitate the Ezekiel war. I believe in many ways, okay, we've got the hook in the jaw, which we announced earlier, or not announced, we talked about earlier. Could it be the natural gas? Ezekiel talks about a land of unwalled villages that's living in prosperity and peace. Does that prosperity and peace come after Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iranian regime are decisively dealt with, and especially the terror proxies, but the Iranian nuclear threat is eliminated, and Israel can, or at least it thinks, it can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. And then the Ezekiel war comes. Yeah, I could see the Ezekiel war in a sense being a war of revenge. And I think there are different factors at play here. For some of the players in that last days confederation that comes against Israel, Russia, for instance, there may be economic interests, the natural gas. Russia has had a natural gas monopoly. Now they don't. And Israel is becoming not a huge challenger. Russia has, someone's described I forget who it was who described Russia as a gas station masquerading as a nation. So Russia, not to offend any of my Russian friends out there, it's a tongue-in-cheek joke, but in all seriousness, Russia's got a lot of natural gas. They've had a monopoly on that, right? And now comes the tiny upstart Israel. They're cutting Russia out and supplying natural gas to Europe. Now, Israel has nowhere near the supplies that Russia has, but still, it's a big deal, and they're a challenger of sorts right now, and Russia doesn't like it. And Vladimir Putin may want, or whoever the Russian leader is at that time, may want all that natural gas to himself. So that's one factor. That's the motivation there. The motivation for the Iranian regime, however, may be revenge as part of this coalition. And the motivation for Turkey could be purely radical Islamist motivations. We want Jerusalem. We want to wipe the Zionist entity off the map. Also a little bit of revenge. How dare Israel strike a Muslim nation, Iran, even though Turkey is Sunni and Iran is Shia. When it comes to Israel, the jihadi forces, they get along just fine. They put their own differences aside and they align against Israel. So they could have more religious radical Islamist motivations on the part of some. On the part of some, there are the revenge motivations. On the part of some, there are economic. And for some, it's all the above. But yeah, different motivations. And I do think that the strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, I would believe it would certainly come before the Ezekiel war. Perhaps Isaiah 17 and the demise of Damascus unfolds as well, which would only add to the revenge factor on the part of that confederation. And Psalm 83, many have discussed Psalm 83, and is that prophetic? I recently did an interview with Bill Salas, author of a book about Psalm 83, a good friend of mine, great guy. And Bill thinks Psalm 83 is yet to come, and he thinks it will precede the Ezekiel war. Fascinating stuff. That interview will be on soon with Bill. We're running out of time, but do I have time for one more question real quick, a little overtime? So many questions here, man, oh man. I need to get back to you on some of these questions. They're all good. Here's the last one from Asher Habtieb. I probably pronounced that wrong. Do you think that the sheer number of Hezbollah rockets could overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system in a future northern war? Asher, good question. You have to think that a lot of those rockets are going to get through. There's 150,000 Hezbollah rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel, a tiny nation. Iron Dome can't stop all of them. We've also got David's Sling, which is more focused on medium-range missiles. and the Arrow missile defense system as well, focused on long-range missiles, the multifaceted system in Israel of missile defense. And don't discount that laser system now, Iron Beam, literally lasers shooting down rockets. That's not quite ready yet for prime time, I don't think. So, look, I'll just say that there's going to be damage in this great northern war, this Hezbollah war. Israel knows that. They're preparing civilians for it. It's not going to be pleasant, but Israel will prevail in that war, and I believe they will defeat Hezbollah decisively. Hey, we got to go. It's been an hour. This has been great, folks. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I want to get to your questions on the next live stream, perhaps sooner, because we want to do some of these premium Q&As as well. So join us as premium members, stock up on those questions, and I hope to have, in the very near future, we'll be announcing it soon, a strictly premium Q&A session where we'll answer every question. Wouldn't that be great? We won't run out of time. God bless you all. Until tomorrow, thanks for joining us. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.